Welcome everyone to the fifth keynote of AO Ventures. I'm here with a very special guest, Sam, who is the founder of Forward Research and the Arweave protocol. And he's here to talk with us today about Arweave, AO, and everything else about being a founder. So we're very excited. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the comments, and we'll just stay on and after the presentation to answer some of them live. So with that being said, I'm excited to pass the mic to Sam, and we can get started.
All right. Okay. Hi. So thank you everyone for joining today. I find that these moments are sort of quite special in the process of building an ecosystem because, well, for a start, this is a relatively small audience. Like we didn't publicly loudly talk about this from the Forward Research side, and that means that it's a very select few people. And so I'd like to take the opportunity to be very blunt and honest about the journey that you guys are just about embarking on, which I think is, as I'll describe, one of the most incredible things you can do with your life is to build something from the ground up. And one of the most fun things, frankly, about building an ecosystem is to get to be there along for the ride with you guys. But I'd like to, I guess, take this opportunity in a relatively private space to, or at least with a smaller audience, to talk about all the things in founding a project in the crypto industry that most likely no one will tell you. Another way to say this talk title I was, considering was everything I wish someone had told me in 2017, but nobody did. So this is really like a combination of many of the most important lessons that I think we've learned founding Arweave and AO. But wider, we've also seen a very large number of people go through the Arweave ecosystem, founding their projects over time as well. And so we invested in something like 100 projects in the last bull market cycle. And so we're very close to a very large set of founders, and we've kind of synthesized some learnings. And so, yeah, I really want to take the opportunity to run you through everything I wish someone had told me and everything we've learned from watching other founders do this on like a personal level, really. Frankly, I'm sorry if you came for tech. There are other times I talk about the tech, but I wanted to take this opportunity to do something a bit different. So yeah, first, congratulations. Embarking on the journey to found a project, something of your own, something you put your sort of heart and soul into, if that makes sense. And build from the ground up, like you're the first employee, if you will, is unbelievably exciting and rewarding. I think it's probably the most rewarding journey that many of you will go on in your lifetimes. Others will face different challenges, but I think that this is, for a large group of the founders that do it, it is the most challenging and also most rewarding journey that you can really embark upon. The challenging part is a lot of what we'll get into today. I want to take the opportunity to talk about all of the difficult decisions that you'll have to make and the likely consequences of them. And I really kind of modeled this talk on one that I gave in 2021, which was the start of the bull market in crypto. This was quite a helpful graph at the time. You could see that suddenly the prices were off again, up and to the right. And I just spoke frankly about bubbles, because crypto is an industry that is basically defined by bubble cycles. There are periods of non-rational hysteria and also non-rational despair. And you as a founder have to go through that. And this video only got 580 views. So I'm kind of hoping that this talk that I'm about to give will get the same or less, so that we can keep it to a private group and I can just speak transparently about how things were. I was pretty happy that I was able to put this information out there this time 3 years ago, sorry. And I guess this is my opportunity, or rather I'm seizing this opportunity that was very kindly offered by AO Ventures to do the same, except slightly different frame. So the rundown, what are we going to talk about? Well, first, what are your motivations? So in the second half, we're going to talk about the decisions and consequences of your actions when you found a project. And a lot of that is just like they're difficult choices is one way to say it. And another way to say it is they're choices where you only have bad options. Like lesser of two evils, I suppose. And a lot of them come with risks and very serious, um, I guess, ethical questions that go along with it too. So we'll talk about funding, decentralization of your projects. What does that actually look like? What are the realistic incentives that you're going to encounter along the way? Bubbles, and then along that path, incentive alignment a little bit. But to steel yourself for the second part, we should first talk about like, what are your motivations for doing this? Because this will be extremely difficult. There is like, I can't remember ever meeting a successful founder who didn't have some crazy story about all of the difficult decisions they had to make and the sort of relentless, well, what would you say, crisis management often, but slog, I suppose, of trying to get something like this off the ground. Yeah, so let's jump into the motivations first and see how we get there. Defining success, right? What is it? I mean, you're all here in this accelerator. I think there's something like 30, 40 of you in the audience. What is it that you're actually trying to achieve? Right? And if you don't specify what that is, you're likely to be led by incentives or desires that you're not fully conscious of. And those can be dangerous. So I think that getting clear in your mind, what is it that you are attempting to actually achieve in the world is a good sort of grounding mechanism that will give you the fortitude required to face those challenges when they inevitably emerge. So I quite like this quote. It's from Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, where she's talking about the motivations of different characters. It's a sort of peculiar book because it reads, each of the characters is portrayed as an archetype. So they're very unrealistic, and the writing is what she called romantic, and I think many people would just call bad. But the ideas in the book are actually pretty good, pretty worth considering. It has a lot of stigma attached to it. It seems like a highly politicized thing. I actually don't believe that that's the case. I think anyone that reads it can get something useful from it. But in this passage later in the book, she's been describing the journey of these different archetypes as they progress through life. There's a character called Peter Keating, whom the main character here, Rourke, is talking about. He says, what was his, this being Peter Keating's, aim in life? It was greatness in other people's eyes, fame, admiration, envy, all that comes from others. Others dictated his convictions, which he did not hold, but he was satisfied that others believed that he held them. Others were his motive power and his prime concern. He didn't want to be great, he wanted to be thought of as great. He didn't want to build, but to be admired as a builder. And I think, yeah, you'll encounter many, many people in life where if you really ask and you try and dig for their incentives, like what is it that's driving them to do the things they're doing? This will be the thing. And often if people don't think it through, it's easy to fall into this sort of mindset. But the outcome of this is never satisfying. It's not something that you will really, would you say, benefit from. So you can try and get fame and glory in other people's eyes, but ultimately it's like attempting to optimize for the projection of oneself back at oneself rather than optimizing for what it is that you actually want. It is a path to a life of, well, you see it in lots of people that become very, very famous, the actors and so on of the world, or baseball players, or whatever. It can really, yeah, a lot of those people don't end up very happy. Many end up suicidal, in fact, actually, strange correlation between that fame and suicide. Not, I would say, a wise grounding for when you start out on this journey. Better to find something that comes from within that you can hold on to, that will steer you through the inevitably dark times that are to come. I like this quote from Paul Graham in 2007 in a blog post, How Not to Die. It didn't mean literally die, but regarding startups. So he says, when startups die, the official cause of death is always either running out of capital or a critical founder bailing. Often the two occur simultaneously, but I think the underlying cause is usually that they've become demoralized. So I'll tell you now, bad shit is coming. It always is in a startup. The odds of getting from launch to liquidity without some kind of disaster happening are 1 in 1,000. So don't get demoralized. When disaster strikes, just say to yourself, okay, this is what Paul was talking about. What did he say to do? Oh yeah, don't give up. That's the would you say, mantra that will get you through the times when, yeah, you're nearly out of capital. The market is bleaker than it's looking today. I know there's 10 billion different problems you'll have to deal with. Realistically, the way that it ends, and I think that there have been relatively few projects in the Arweave ecosystem that have actually sort of properly terminated. But in the wider cryptosphere, we had some exposure to that, the inside sort of background story of it. And as far as I can tell, it does appear to be largely true. People become demoralized and they give up because the problems seem insurmountable. And really the difference, the delta between successful founders and unsuccessful founders, a lot of it just comes down to grit and determination. I think Mark Andreessen, I can't remember that quote directly, but he said on a few different occasions that, yeah, like you can have a smart founder that is, how did he frame it? Yeah, if you have a smart founder that is doesn't have grit or determination, they will almost certainly fail. But you can take a reasonably smart founder. You can take a cut on intelligence if you just bolster it with drive that is unending. And this is, yeah, that latter bucket is far more likely to be successful. You really have to steel yourself for the journey. Yeah, we had our own bout of this to show some, what do you say? How do we describe this exactly? It's not just others, I'm not judging other people. It's happened to us too. In 2017, we started Arweave. We sold tokens at a price of about $0.07, I believe it was. And there was a brief period of hysteria in 2018 in which everyone was very excited about Arweave, like crazy excited. They went from not that interested in it to just, yeah, sort of, frankly, like crowd psychosis level of excited. It was my first experience seeing what crowds can do, if that makes sense. In en masse together, they do not have the sort of reliable, sensible attitude that you can expect from individuals, or at least hope to expect from individuals. In crowds, they're even more extreme in their behavior. And so, yeah, they were unbelievably excited in June 2018, and by this was probably January 2019, I think. Yeah, there was someone that was so upset they created a website called arweavescam.com, which was very painful. Like, you put your heart and soul into this thing and then people call it a scam. We've seen this happen to a couple of other projects in the ecosystem, although they largely avoided it in the last bear market because they had private market investors rather than public market investors, which certainly shields in some ways, although it creates other issues that we can talk about later. Yeah, this was really painful. We put our life and soul into this thing. We desperately tried to do well by it. And, we're all sitting here today, so I guess it turned out pretty good. But at this time, people were so upset, and that was a painful moment. It might not look like this for you guys, but it could definitely look something similar. And you have to be able to steel yourself through such moments. So having a good reason is probably the most important thing. I would say that if in the optimal case, you'd be working on something so meaningful that you simply cannot give up on it. So for me personally, I just found the idea that we should create a ledger of speech that was outside the control of any one individual so so profound and necessary in this world that we find ourselves in today, that it was worth essentially giving anything for, to pursue and to turn into a reality. And now, sitting here, what was that? That must have been 6 years ago, I suppose. Only 5 years ago. Yeah, sitting here 5 years later, we're so much closer to achieving the goal. And that brings me like no end of joy, I guess. Yeah, you really have to find the thing that in the darkest hour, when everything in the world tells you to give up on it, you just can't. Because if you don't do it, well, is someone else going to do it? It's not obvious that anyone else is that passionate. Maybe it just won't happen. And once you get a little bit down the line with something like this question kind of morphs from, what is something that is so meaningful that you cannot give up on it, to you're kind of halfway there, if that makes sense. And subsequently, that intensifies the strength of the statement. And so the closer you get towards this goal that's sufficiently meaningful for you, the more likely you are to be able to stick with it and find solace in it when everything else in the world tells you that it's just not worth it. So have a why that you cannot give up on. Okay, many people that I've spoken to over the years simply don't know what that is for them, and they think that there's a simple question that can get you started down the road to finding it personally, and perhaps it's not the project you're working on right now. And if that's the case, then I would strongly say, and sorry, AO Ventures, I'm kind of throwing a spanner in your works here, but like, it's worth getting right to start with. If you're going to invest your whole life and energy into this thing, and that's what it will need in order to succeed, then it better be something worth it. And if your current path is not going to bring you to that outcome, eventually, then you're best to course correct now rather than later, because the cost only intensifies over time. So in order for this to work, please try and remember just your instinctive reactions in the order that they come to you. Don't think too much, just remember what's the immediate thought. All right, so what is wrong with the world? What is it that you just can't stop thinking about? You wish what could obviously be better, but isn't. Okay, well, I hope that summoned something from within you that speaks to you on a sort of personal level, because that, I think, is likely to be the seed of a meaningful journey in the case of founding something, where that something is right, like it should be a solution to a problem. Well, what could obviously be better, but it isn't. The hardest answer to this is actually, and I've heard this from a couple of people over the years, everything is basically fine. Yeah, to be frank with you, there may be many other approaches to startups. But if your answer is everything is basically fine, and you really can't think of anything that's worthwhile to fix, then I'm sorry, my school of thought on like founding projects probably won't be able to help you. There are many other different schools of thoughts. And yeah, many successful founders that come at it from a more Peter Keating style direction, and they seem to, at least outwardly, enjoy it, or at least something in it keeps them going, I guess. But yeah, I'm afraid I'm not the person to speak to. But if you did answer that, if there was some nugget in your mind that said like, oh, that problem, that's fixable, or someone should fix this. This is something that is just isn't right. The world should be better in this way. Well, if you have that, then you probably have the answer to what's the thing that is most meaningful to you, and the thing that is worth pursuing to solve. And that will steel you for the inevitable hardship that will come as you pursue it. All right, so maybe, hopefully, now we have some sort of expectation or understanding of why. Then the next part of the talk, I'd like to run through just like the top highlights, if you will, of the hardest decisions that you'll have to make, the consequences of them. And I thought it was worthwhile to put time into this now, because you're about to start making them. most of you, I think, probably won't have taken any funding at this point. But as soon as you take funding, you're kind of setting the future direction of your project um, in a way that is permanent and you won't be able to reverse. And so you really have to get it right. And it's tricky because could say, be careful of the incentives of the people that you take advice from. But we'll get into that as we go. All right, so section one, funding. You need capital. Right? You can't do what you're doing. You can't work on your project full time, most likely, if nobody gives you capital with which to do it. Well, the impact of those decisions is irreversible. You can't just reverse time and fix it up later. Good rule of thumb is, and essentially, you could say funding is also the question of whom should own the economic rights or the upside from your productive labor as you build this thing. And I think that the sensible rule of thumb is optimize for ownership being in the hands of those who will help you long term, like really long term. It's many people, perhaps all people, will claim that they will help you long term. For the most part, it won't be true. You really need to calculate, well, okay, I'm trying to build a project that does X. In the case of Arweave, I was trying to build a project that creates a permanent ledger of speech. And speech is, turns out, basically cyberspace. It's when we publish something, it becomes, in this new world of the internet, not even new anymore, I guess. But in the world we inhabit, speech acts end up becoming places you can be, if you will. Like we're all here together in this online forum. Well, I don't know how many of you are aware of the space around where it is that you're watching this, but we tend to have a sort of tunnel vision, if you will. We focus in on the experience that's created by the computers. What is that experience? Well, at its base layer is data. So in my case, I wanted to build a decentralized ledger of speech or a decentralized cyberspace. And well, who is going to provide value to that over time is the question I was trying to solve for. We didn't do it perfectly with Arweave. We're trying some new approaches that you'll hear about very soon in the future, but like those decisions for Arweave are permanent. I think it worked well enough, but like you guys are starting from scratch, so you get the opportunity to do it as optimally as you can from the beginning. So there's a belief in different sections of crypto that community is everything. Or the VCs might tell you the VCs are really what you need. You can't make a project successful without them. The truth, as far as I can discern it, is neither of those things are correct. Both community and VCs can genuinely help your project grow over time. They can become the backbone of it that, would you say, sort of provides a social capital or social awareness distribution of your idea and your project to a wide group of people. But they can also do massive harm to your project on both sides. So we saw how community can backfire in this screenshot I showed from earlier. For us, that was our experience, although others have many different experiences of it. But VCs can also be just as destructive. At around that time in December, I'm just using personal examples because the ones I know most, but so please. And I can also speak about most freely because a lot of the other examples we have are given in confidence, and so we can't describe them. So please don't mistake the personal examples in this talk for just a very specific set. We really tried to generalize the advice here across as wide and make it applicable to as wide a set as possible. Okay, so at a similar moment in December 2018, January 2019, we had a particular investor whose names I won't mention, another one of those that was extremely excited about Arweave in just June 2018, just 6-7 months earlier. And they were calling me, pinging me every single day saying that you should list on Arweave tokens on a really bad exchange. And if we'd done that in the pit of the bear market, this would have been very negative for the project, because what this person really wanted was just to be able to sell for whatever price they would get. And eventually they sold to another VC. It's actually another good example because they were unbelievably helpful. Yeah, and they had misaligned incentives. And so you'll very often find this with the VC community. In the traditional startup equity world, VCs had a time horizon that was, they invest while the project is, or the company in that case, is VC private. And they expect like a 4 to 7 year time horizon before the company goes public. And they might apply some pressure near the end to make it public. But in the crypto markets, we don't have that. Instead, what we have is a situation where tokens become public after VCs buy them somewhere between 3 months to 18 months max, something like that, very, very quickly. And this creates incentives where the people providing capital, whether they be community or VCs, might be incentivized around liquidity, potentially even more so than price appreciation, which will be misaligned with your incentives as a founder. Right? So you're embarking on this journey and you know that it's going to be 5, 10, 15 years to get this thing off the ground. But you're working with people who have a time horizon that is a maximum, a tenth of the time horizon of you. And that can cause some really intense problems. And so it's something that you should just be aware of. Like when you're speaking to people, when they say, we're in it for the long term, etc., you can kind of feed that with a little bit of skepticism. A good thing you can do with VCs is to ask for references, ask other founders. So one thing that's important to plug yourself into is the sort of founder information network. Founders like to talk to other people building projects. It's a kind of kinship, I suppose. And there's a lot of information that is passed between creators of project just using this. And so you can get a really good sense of what it's like to actually work with a VC just by asking those. I was once at the offices of a, let's say, just major US VC fund. I won't mention which one, but and I was sitting on the sofa waiting to go speak to the GPs in the reception area. And the guy sitting next to me was the founder of a project. It was really random. This group invests in lots of Web2 stuff as well, but he happened to be the creator of a project that had just been sued by the SEC. And he was going to go speak to the GPs of this fund, who I doubt would have been particularly happy about it. And they ended up offering us a term sheet. And so I just found this guy's email address and reached out to him. And basically just asked for a reference check and said, hey, I'm that guy that was on the sofa next to you at their office a week ago. Would you mind giving me some feedback on what I'd like to work with? And he told me, yeah, like in the darkest moment, they were, which I think this SEC lawsuit for this particular project probably was their darkest moment. That was their January 2019. They got on the phone immediately and they tried to help as best they could, and they were understanding when it didn't go well. And then he told me something that was useful and I would recommend to you, which is before we took their money, he said, we asked, can we speak to every founder that you've ever fired? Which I thought was very interesting. And so he did. And then he got references from all of these people that the VCs had voted on boards to remove as the CEOs of their companies, again, in the sort of more Web2 space. And in that case, the reference came back remarkably well. But I would say just try and get as much information from other founders as you can about what it's really like to work with the different venture capital firms. It'll save you a lot of pain over time. All right. So funding will determine token economics. Right? So as soon as you start selling, basically pre-selling access to the token supply of whatever it is you're building, you can't go back from that. It's an irreversible decision. And you'll be stuck with that token economic model more or less forever. Unless you choose to pivot the token economic model, but I would also say that's actually very bad behavior on the parts of the founders, because then it's not clear what the VCs were investing into. So it has to be like fair and balanced here. okay, the token economics will determine the future of your project. So let's take a look at some examples. I won't mention these projects by name, but you could probably work it out if you were curious. Here's a project that sold 25% of their token supply in a seed round. So when the valuation was very, very low. And then they had 24% for a foundation, 18% for team, early backers, another 10%, strategic round, another 7%, and then the pre-sale 5%. So when you add all of this up, it's like 12, 37%, something like this. No, more. Maybe 47%, that would be, I don't know, in sales of the token before the network has even launched. Well, they needed this in order to survive, right? Just like you, they're at the beginning of the journey and they're like, okay, I need capital in order to make this thing happen. Fair enough. Okay, but what actually happened? Well, this is what happened. So the token price started at about $450 and then cataclysmically declined in a, that's not even 1/x style curve. This is just horrendous. It never recovered. And so they pushed as much as they could to build traction and interest in this project, but all the people that were involved in this project financially got burned because all of those investors at the beginning, particularly the seed round investors there, they were 25%. Well, they just sold their tokens because the delta in price between the seed round, so the earliest access to the token supply, and the price when it got to market, I don't know the specifics here, but is presumably, and in almost every case, enormous. And there's really no coming back from this because who would want to get involved in a project like this? It just is a irreversible curse. Every time someone thinks about this project, whose name I nearly just mentioned, they think, oh yeah, everybody lost all of their money. They think they're scammers, which may or may not actually be true, but they feel hurt by it. They're wronged by it. And subsequently, and the non-economic side of this, trying to get people to use their protocol is very, very difficult. It's a real public black mark that they can never erase, I guess. So how about another project? They took a different approach, right? So they only gave 10% tokens to investors here. It's a much, much smaller percentage. And you could think logically, going back to what I was saying at the beginning, okay, who's going to provide value over time? Well, I guess it might be the miners, and they optimized for that. Fair enough. So they took 20% to be owned by their labs company and their foundation, and they were going to grow it over time. Seems kind of reasonable, sensible that there should at least be some funding for ecosystem like that. 10% to investors, 70% to the miners. Well, what happened? Okay, so they launched in, I think it's about 2020, publicly traded, and their market cap has looked like this over time. So you can see that it went up quite a lot at the beginning, but that was a bull market, so did everything. It went down and they recovered, and until like just a few weeks ago, they were back to, give or take 50% of their maximum market cap. Okay, well, you think that's not so bad. Well, because of those token economics that they chose, giving all those tokens to miners over time, what happened to the price? Oh, so they had very, very intense inflation of the token supply over time, paying to, trying to work out how not to give this away, paying to the miners for providing services that, long story short, no one really wanted to buy, but they were trying to bootstrap demand by subsidizing supply. Well, the strategy meant that, again, everyone that economically took part in this project has been massively burnt by it. And this creates a reputation that is just really hard to, no matter how useful they make the protocol, it's really hard to get around. It will work against them forever, basically. The same with the other project. And so, long story short, think very, very carefully about how and when your tokens are going to be released and to whom they're going to be released. You probably want a slow very, very slow distribution of tokens over a long period of time, and you want to maximize the utility of the people whose hands they end up in. There are some ways to try and get the tokens into the hands of useful people later by treasury management and this type of thing, but really you want to steadily do it as you gain confidence that people are contributing real value to building the protocol or the network or whatever it is that your meaningful journey pushes you towards. All right, decentralization. And I'm sorry, this is just a question that as far as I've seen, doesn't really have any good answers. Bitcoin did it pretty well. The token supply, the halving emission schedule meant that basically a reasonable chunk was released at the beginning, which meant that inflation long-term was low, but there's still large amounts of incentives around for the people that are providing security to the network, at least now, although there's no funding for the ecosystem, which is a separate problem. But yeah, sorry, no good answers here, but at least now you're aware perhaps of some of the some of the other dangers. Okay, decentralization. So why are we all here in the first place? Well, ultimately, all of this got started with Bitcoin, right, which was trying to create a, quote, purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash, unquote. They wanted to create a system, whoever Satoshi Nakamoto was, that created a decentralized network that could do payments. And this meant that it was disintermediated and trustless. So you could hold value inside the system, and you didn't have to trust anyone individual or group not to inflate that value away. I'm sure all of you already know that. But I see Web3 as essentially another layer on top of this. So taking that same principle of trustless services and applying it to other areas of life in the form of Arweave, or in Arweave, that takes the form of providing a trustless ledger of speech. So anyone should be able to write to Arweave and not have to worry about anyone else being able to censor them, and having that data replicated across time in the most sensible way possible. Without a concern for censorship. And would you say neutrality? And that gives rise to the ability to build all kinds of things, like many of the things you guys are building, I'm sure, but basically decentralized, trustless web services, cyberspace services, if you want to say, in many, many forms. Now, if we don't do that, if we don't achieve that mission of trustlessness, like, why do any of this at all? Like, if you're going to build a centralized piece of machinery, you could just do that in Web 2. Like, you don't need any of this complex infrastructure. We try to make Arweave as easy as possible to build on top of, but ultimately at least as of today, is slightly harder, at least, than building in a Web 2 environment. Or it's less commonly known too, is just another thing. So if you're not going to harness and leverage those capabilities that peer-to-peer or decentralized or blockchain technologies give you, you could just do this in the TradFi space or in the Web 2 space, and it would be an awful lot easier. But nobody will ask you to do this, interestingly. You will have to be the driver that keeps yourself, honest to the mission that you commit yourself towards, whatever that happens to be. In the crypto space, most of the people that you will meet are driven one way or another by economics and the incentives that are directly derived from them. Particularly people that will be involved with your project. At the beginning, at least, there will be a massive weighting towards the economic side of what you're building and away from the utility of it. And this will incentivize you essentially to cut corners at minimum, amongst many other things. So here's an outline of the Web3 project doom spiral that I think has played out across maybe 90% of things in the crypto space. Maybe more, probably more like 95%. And I'm not, trying to throw shade, I understand why this happens. It's extremely strong incentives to do so. You really have to push back against it. And, and often it's not even clear like how. All the people you'll be surrounded with are people that are pushing you in this other direction, which I'll lay out in a moment. And there really won't be very many people around trying to keep you honest to the original core vision. So that will have to come from inside you one way or another. Just points back to the importance of having a strong why in the first place. Right. So founder starts a project. Typically, it's how it works. They build something really awesome. Typically, the most efficient stage of creation in a project, interestingly, is the earliest possible moments when it's like one or two people. So actually, probably the stage that you guys are in right now, there's a high likelihood that this or the phase that comes shortly after it will be your most efficient moment for building that you will ever experience. There's also reasons for that we'll get into later, but this is something worth knowing up front. So next up, the VCs typically notice that it's cool and you raise money from them. And then they turn around the next day, understandably, because they've just given you money to build something that doesn't yet exist and say, hey, what's the roadmap? What are you going to do with it next? And okay, fair enough. So you produce a roadmap and you start progressing down that road. Danger with roadmaps, it's a startup. You have no idea what's going to work or what's going to fail. People want you to commit to a long roadmap, but you're going to find that actually you have to change it 10 times a day. So that's another danger there. Again, no great answers, but just a heads up. All right. Shortly after that, the VCs, when you start making progress along that path, the VCs will pressure you to have a public token launch, when token. Maybe even the public will when token you as well. Great. And then after the initial excitement of that has subsided, and what you'll of course notice is that many of the people that pushed you to do that thing will be gone. You won't hear from them again because they sold their tokens. They're off, doing something new with their lives. But you are still here, right? You are still going to be running your projects, and you will have to live with the consequences of your decisions. So again, just another reason to be wary and to think long term. Okay, so now you've got a public roadmap. Sorry, you've got a public token. There's going to be a lot of pressure to create an endless roadmap. And almost every project in crypto has fallen into this trap. It's very hard to find one that doesn't. Arweave doesn't have a public roadmap and hasn't done since launch. But we had immense pressure to have one. And I speak to founders all the time that experience the same set of pressures. But when you do that, when you create this endless roadmap, you're moving away from the idea of creating a trustless protocol and into the realm of just building a product. And essentially, unfortunately, a product for other people to speculate on the future value of, not just to use. And this is just a natural result of the fact that almost everyone you will meet in crypto, again, it's just incentivized around the financial components. One of the results of an endless roadmap is centralization. So we even see this with some of the largest projects like Ethereum. Ultimately, Ethereum, Vitalik's got his flowcharts of the purge, merge, scourge. I forget what the others are. There's many. They all end in urge for some reason. Well, that's great, but the point of a protocol was that it was trustless. And if you're telling me in the future you're going to some specific set of people, typically the founders, are going to change the protocol to do X, Y, and Z, then I can't trust it to do really anything, because what you're promising me is you're going to change it from under my feet. So I can't just use it as a neutral protocol. It's not trustless. I can't trust it today to do the things it's doing today forever, because you promised me you're going to change it. And I can't be sure that the way that you said that you're going to change it is actually how you're going to change it. Because as previously described, the roadmap that you generate, you're likely to deviate from a million times just because of the nature of startups. And this is likely to end you in a position where, you're being endlessly dragged around in cycles. probably issuing something that in many countries would look like a traditional security. And you have a public that is depending on your endless roadmap that you are, touting, and they will push you to do more and more of it. And you'll note that basically each time the price goes up, if you do these things that they want you to do, well, those people will exit, and then new people will come, and then those people will have expectations. And so if we go back to our project over here, right, the people that bought on the way down had high expectations of it going up in the future, and well, they were disappointed, and so now they're angry, and they want they want whatever they want, and you're going to be stuck in the middle of it. And if you give them what they want today, you might well find yourself in a worse position tomorrow. And so that's a real danger here. Anyway, all of this leads to centralization. So instead of building a protocol, you end up building a product. And then the worst kick in the teeth that we've seen for many of these projects is, well, because they didn't really build something that has true fundamental value driven by trustlessness, which I think is where almost all of the value in crypto is derived from, one way or another. Like ultimately, like the narrative moves on and people just get bored and they go do something else, and you run out of funds. And then, if that wasn't bad enough, then the project drops offline because it wasn't really decentralized in the first place. And subsequently, everything you've done, that big running in circles loop that you've been going through, it's just over, and you have nothing to show for it. And so you really have to have the strength of will to say, actually, we are building a protocol, not a product. Here's what it's going to do explicitly. Ideally, by the time you talk to people, it's as close as possible to just doing that thing. So with Arweave, like, we've not had a public roadmap since the launch of the network in the first place. And with AO, we sat on AO. We didn't tell anyone about it until we were pretty sure that at least the data protocol part of it was correct. And that sets us up for a situation where, well, you just build the protocol right at the beginning, you ship it. There's no future expectations on it because it just is neutral infrastructure that exists, just like Bitcoin or HTTP or TCP/IP, UDP, all of the protocols that run the internet. And then people can use it, and it's valuable to people because it can't go offline. It can't be changed. It's not centralized around the roadmap of an individual organizational group. And this provides real value, and people do tend to see this over in the fullness of time. And that provides a sort of sustainable loop, as well as actually helping you achieve what it is that you set out to achieve in the first place, rather than crazy cycles of speculation, basically. Okay, something to pay attention to is that you're going to be incentivized to cut endless corners, right? Building decentralized infrastructure is unfortunately today harder than building centralized infrastructure. And you will be pushed by all of those people I mentioned to make progress extremely quickly, and not just them, but by the wider market. Maybe even your just personal sense of urgency to achieve something. You'll be pushed to cut corners, and those corners most often look like adding centralized cogs to the product that you're building. And then because of that nature of, okay, you get to one point, everyone's excited and happy, then they want another thing endlessly forever. You can be pretty sure that you're not going to get back to decentralizing that first thing at the start. Like, it's very, very unlikely to happen. And the only real instances where we've seen anything close to this happening after people proclaim that they're going to be, quote, progressively decentralized is DAOs, I guess, quote, exit to community, unquote, where basically the founders just sell their share of the project, and they leave it to an unorganized, basically public on-chain company, if you will, to go sort it out. And most of the time that never really works. And when it does get saved, it's often because the founders come back. A good example would be MakerDAO and a couple of others I won't mention. Then shouldn't have mentioned any project names. I'm trying to throw shade, just being transparent about how the industry works. yeah, like the founders often come back and they right the ship, but now they have to deal with the fact there's this horde of people with differing opinions, which is obviously good in some ways, but ultimately at the beginning, before a project has found product market fit or protocol market fit, depending on what it is they're building, um, you're very unlikely to do that by committee. Is essentially the way that we've seen it happen. And DAOs are a cool idea, the idea of programmable organizations, but in reality, the way that they're constructed today, most of the time, is that they're just on-chain companies in some form. That's actually how they're being treated by the legal system as well, as unincorporated partnerships in most countries. Yeah, it's not clear why a company, on-chain company running a service is really all that much better or trustless than Amazon running a service. Like the truth is, you can just go buy shares in Amazon and vote on it if you want to. The only delta is the board of directors, but they report to the shareholders. So, it's pretty similar systems with a lot of decentralization theater around the edges. And in truth, the services they produce provide normally, depending on what you give to governance to govern, right? The powers you grant. Most of the time, you don't end up with services that are any more trustless than in the traditional Web2 market. So to me, this would not seem like an effective use of the limited time we all have on Earth. Okay, so some pointers. Set clear and limited expectations, and then stick to them so that you're predictable. Arweave hasn't had a public roadmap for 5 years, 6 years now, nearly. But people see that the protocol becomes a more and more mature version of what it is we set out to build, like Bitcoin does over time. Just small tweaks and upgrades. It becomes more and more reliable infrastructure, which you can then work to build on top of. But the core thing is immutable, or only changeable within, I think like Bitcoin level of change is probably a good metric to use once you can get your project to product market fit and beyond. Then people can really have trust in it. Like we fundamentally just couldn't change the purpose of Arweave now to be, I don't know, a on-chain marketplace for dogs, or whatever. Like there's just no way we can do that. It's simply impossible. And so as a result of that lack of roadmap, the robustness and the functionality of the services that's built at the beginning, you get these effects of like, okay, people trust the protocol and then it grows in value, and then people build on top of it, and you end up with something that is actually close to what you wanted to achieve in the first place. Yeah, you should always assume that you will never ship the decentralized version of the centralized product that you ship. I think this is just a good rule of thumb to keep in the back of your mind, because if you're busy today and you're cutting corners, the likelihood you're not going to be busy tomorrow and will have time to go back and fix up those corners is actually relatively low. The incentives just don't work like that. All right, so final part, bubbles. Okay, this is the price of Bitcoin over time. Now, the bit that we normally see and pay attention to, right, is this part here, or wherever the latest price is, and perhaps kind of cycle before. Well, let me tell you a story about back here, this tiny little blip when we were inside it in 2014, I think it was approximately, and the one before this in 2011, which is not just a flat line, you don't even see a pixel move. It felt enormous, and the hysteria and hype was just as strong, actually far stronger than it is today. The industry is unbelievably cyclical. This is likely a consequence of two things, I think. The first is just new technology plus markets equals irrational exuberance and depression, basically. This has been true seemingly throughout history, as far as I'm aware. Certainly back to like railroads in 300, 400 years ago. Did you know that there was what was this ratio again? Something like, I'm going to butcher this, but the idea is correct, if not the precise numbers. Yeah, there was something like more railway pre-sales, if you will, so shares for sales of shares in projects to build railway tracks in the UK than there were like miles of roads or something like this in the early stage of the railroad revolution. So people got so excited, they put all of this money into building railways, which is great, actually. It's how progress happens. But then, 5 years later, what do you know? Similar to this. And so, and the same, of course, most famously in recent times was true for the dot-com bubble. So when the internet, or rather when the web actually first came around, there was this enormous irrational exuberance in the market about everything is going to be online. The classic example is pets.com, a marketplace for pets. And maybe pets.com would actually work today. I'm sure there are services that sell pets online and deliver them to you, or sell, whatever equipment you need for your pet. But it didn't work back then. And then pets.com classically went bankrupt. And Jeff Bezos ended up turning up to the office wearing a suit for 2 years to show how serious he was to Wall Street while starting Amazon. But out of the ashes of that came huge companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon. All of the major innovations have this, they generate this crowd psychology where people get irrationally excited about something. And then they also most frequently get irrationally depressed about it shortly afterwards, after they see that they've become too obsessed and too excited. And then prices reset, typically lower than they probably should be. Where really, if you look at crypto, right, like if you were to look at the fundamental value of Bitcoin, this kind of smooth line down the middle was probably approximating its usefulness and relevance to people. But that's not how markets work. The second problem with crypto specifically, I think, is that, well, this is financial innovation, and it's liquid very early, which means that there's a lot to speculate on. And that brings in people that want to speculate. And that's partially why you'll get so many people that are hyper-focused on the finances of your project, at least at the beginning, on the path to building something that is actually useful. And so you could say like the product of DeFi in a lot of ways is number go up, right? It's a financial product. And that means that when the product is working very well, more people buy into it, which makes numbers go up more. You see this with a large, quote, stablecoin, unquote, project that is active right now. It's highly likely, I think, to crash sometime in this market cycle. The mechanisms work great when more and more capital is flowing into the system. And then as soon as that capital starts to leave, the mechanisms start to fail, and then the product is no longer useful. If the product of financial, or if the utility of financial products is value preservation sometimes, but less frequently, more about value growth, then if numbers are going up, everything is good, and if numbers are going down, everything is terrible. And this creates a really severe market cycle that I think is even more intense than we find in the normal technology markets, although that's the underpinning that is driving this in the first place. And this is a reality that you will have to deal with as a founder. I'm not sure how many of you are new to crypto, if this is your first rodeo, if you will. But yeah, if it is, just be aware that if this continues in the same pattern that it did before, number goes way up here, then with extremely high degree of likelihood, we're going to have some sort of crash like this. It's what's happened every other time. I think that the volatility of the industry in general is slowly ironing out, which is good. And that will happen as the technology becomes more and more adopted. But you got to deal with this reality that the excitement and enthusiasm that other people have right now, and maybe you have yourself, is it's likely to be matched by the inversion at some point in time. So prepare yourself. Okay, so let's look at this period. This was the 2021-22 bull cycle. I didn't blank out their name here. I don't think they would mind though. Know those people relatively well. So Solana, right? So in the peak of the hype cycle, Solana sponsored a stage at Lollapalooza, Protocol, sponsoring a music concert. Kind of an absurdity if you went back in time and you told Satoshi that's what was going to happen. I don't think they would have believed you. But here we are. This is what happened. Everyone was so excited. These things were the future. the future is NFTs and Web3 and so on. Um, and there were so many crypto yacht parties that, of course, someone started an NFT collection, which was called Crypto Yacht Party. Um, yeah, that was a very good sign of the times. Pro tip for the industry: if people start having a lot of yacht parties, you know that the bad times are coming. Yeah, gather acorns for the winter. It won't last forever. And so that's what we'll look at next, right? So this down part of the cycle, which if you went through it, it was pretty excruciating. For us at Arweave, you know, having founded Arweave, it wasn't nearly as bad, frankly, this time. It wasn't pleasant by any stretch. And all of the optimism and excitement was inverted. And so there was just unnecessary pessimism. But yeah, as a founder, the first time you go through this cycle, ours was down here. And in fact, that when we raised capital in 2018 was around here, just before this ledge. And this was peak misery, if you will, down here when everyone was most depressed and those things I mentioned earlier happened. You're likely to get your own version of that. It'll come in a different form. But when that happens, obviously modulated by, volatility has declined, but you'll get it a bit. And this starts to look like, and this is what I find the most personally horrendous. All those people that are so excited in that market cycle, it was to invest in another stable coin that collapsed, Terra Luna, which is a good lesson in mechanism design for anyone that wants one. But we'll save that for another day. Yeah, they lost their life savings. They're considering suicide. And this happens every single time, reliably. In fact, in that talk I gave in 2021, I had a slide with similar image to this, but from the prior cycle, where on Reddit they had added, suicide helpline posts to the top of the subreddit for crypto. I think it was. It's just horrendous. Like all of that enthusiasm turns into the exact opposite, which is irrational despair. Yeah. So I don't think that this is a bubble like the others yet, but if it were to develop, then just have in the back of your mind that the euphoria is not all fun and games, and the yacht parties, it's highly predictable that this moment comes again where Terra Luna crashes and we end up in this immense despair. And so I think as a founder, that means you really have to take your decisions very, very seriously. Yeah, can't predict cleaner than that, I guess. They will have consequences. You will have to live through the downside just as you live through the upside. So if I were you, I would be trying to see yourself as kind of riding a wave, if you will. You know that the wave is going to crash down. I don't know the terminology, I'm sorry. But down the wave has already started to crash, so you smoothly surf along it. Well, everyone's getting excited over there. The thing is coming crashing down on them. You have to just stay in even keel calculate your own level of rational enthusiasm or pessimism about the industry, about what you're doing. What are the long-term prospects? And focus on that. Don't get carried away with the euphoria, because then you're likely to get carried away with the despair too. Try and keep as even a keel as you can over a very long period of time. Keep a relentlessly neutral attitude, I guess. And then, of course, this ends with many of those founders going to prison. Do Kwon, Sam Bankman-Fried here, and others. CZ, I guess, for a few months. Main characters often go to prison, seemingly. Something worth noting. Yeah, so the depressing realities aside, I want to circle back. Like, this genuinely can be the most exciting and rewarding journey of your life if you really commit yourself to it. The friends you'll make along the way and the experiences you'll have will just be very, very intense relative to normal civilian life where you're working a 9-to-5 job. You won't be able to get this in many other places in life. And that's a true gift. It's the most, I would recommend it even despite everything I just said, I would recommend that every person, try and strike out for themselves and build something, and see where the journey takes you. It's unbelievably exciting. I find it hard to conjure, thinking through everyone I know, a founder that would say that they shouldn't have done the journey in the first place. That's very, very unlikely outcome. Um, but it'll be an adventure. You're going on a true old style adventure. Um, venture capital has venture in the name for a reason. And you're not even that detached from it. In venture capital, they invest in 100 projects with the expectation 99 of them will fail, but one will be immensely successful. Well, you're attaching yourself to one project and going on that adventure. God, how much more intense and exciting could that be? So, I don't mean to put you off by any stretch, but I just want to state the real truth of what it is you're embarking on, so that you have some of the knowledge that, I would have loved to have had. And I think many of the founder friends that I have would have also appreciated someone telling me right back at the beginning. And I'm not invested in, I don't think, any of your projects. So I'm pretty neutral here. Obviously, you're building on Arweave, and that's great. That's my incentive. So take everything I say with that grain of salt. But that's the reality and the fun and the cataclysm all in one go. So some basic conclusions and kind of things that can help. Have a great why. Make sure when you start out on the journey that there is something that's going to steal you through those dark moments and help guide you on the difficult decisions you will have to make and the real world consequences that will arise from that. One of the great differences between being an employee and being a founder is that you live the outcome of your actions in a much more severe way. You're really tightly bound to it. There is no safety mechanism. And at the same time, there is no ceiling, if you will. There's no cap to how high you can fly, I suppose. So just have a great why that will steel you for those moments, guide you towards those heights. Take advice that you get from anyone, including me, with an understanding of their incentives. This is particularly true when it comes to fundraising. The people you speak to will, and even community engagement, I think, particularly at the beginning, it might take you quite a while before you get to this point where the focus shifts from number go up, number go down to the real utility of the thing that you're building. And so during the period, it's very, very important to have a strong understanding of the incentives of the people that you are taking advice from. I would call this like rule number one, maybe even. And why is probably better. That's 0. We'll put 0 indexes. And this would be number 1. Number 2, be aware that you're going to live through cycles in crypto. One way or another, you're going to experience both sides of it. It can be very, very extreme. Make sure you tailor your decisions when everyone else is excited, exuberant even. Tailor your decisions such that when you are on the other side of it, when things are coming down and everyone is miserable and you get that exact inversion of the exuberance, tailor it so you can live with it and it makes sense. Really try and use that as a backstop. I would say, while everyone else around you is getting hysterical one way or another, just try and keep an even keel. Stay focused on the long term. Forget about the short term. Yeah, you are almost guaranteed to experience the other side. All right, stay true to your mission. That one should speak for itself. Make sure if you set out to build something that's actually decentralized, you are the one that pushes towards that end, or trustless, I actually think is more important than decentralized. If you set out to build a trustless service, that's amazing. That's nothing could be more exciting as far as I'm concerned, or worthy of your time and attention. Like, God, don't we want to live in a world where we don't have to trust massive companies and not to make decisions that are against our existence in cyberspace, right? Your ability to speak is obviously the one that is something that's meaningful to me. But for other people, it's also other things like the freedom to transact, the freedom to make economic decisions whatever they be, is something that speaks to a lot of people. Stay true to that, because you will be the person that guides your project, at least in the short term, uh, and basically makes it so that that thing either exists or doesn't. There'll be many incentives you encounter along the way that will deter you from it. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's down to you. So, all right. I probably shouldn't have a forward research logo here. This is kind of like, what's that disclaimer everyone gives? Um, every everything I just said is just my personal opinion. I don't think it's an institutional one, although a lot of those experiences were gathered as a team. And so, okay, I think I probably spoke for an hour there. Apologies, I've been very long, but I'm happy to take questions as long
Oh,
as you need.
amazing, amazing. That was my next question. So thank you again for that, sharing that well-earned knowledge. And we have a ton of questions, but I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So I'll ask a few,
Yeah, of course.
and we'll see how many we get to. So, first question, Sam, would love to get your honest point of view on how non-technical founders can leverage the power of this great ecosystem to build something we think can bring Arweave to the mainstream consumer.
Oh, well, that one's easy. God, all the technical founders desperately need non-technical help. So find someone that's building something that you think is cool, or convince them that what you're building or you want to build is cool enough, and join forces and work together on it. Um, Lots of founders are technical, but over time the tech becomes less and less important, and more of their time is spent on steering the ship one way or another. So yeah, those non-technical founders are just as important as the technical ones, as far as I'm concerned.
And founder question. So Arweave and AO are truly awesome tech, but how do they play with business to business, i.e. GDPR?
Oh, yeah, right. Because we built an on-chain storage system that's built to scale to arbitrary sizes, inevitably you're going to get lots of people storing lots of things that they otherwise wouldn't have done on blockchains. Like you can store some data on Bitcoin, but it's very limited. And so we had to face this problem really early on. And the answer is actually pretty obvious in retrospect. You just make it so that the miners can choose what it is they store. And then whether the data that you put onto Arweave is replicated over time depends on, you have to pay for it, you have to upload it, obviously. And then there has to be some sufficiently large group of people in the world that are willing to store the data exposed to their local jurisdiction, including, of course, under GDPR regulations, which are quasi-global. They spread not just in the European Union. Yeah, and so if you have a piece of content and someone signals it, there's a standard we built called ANS 107, I think. Might be wrong about that. I always get the numbers wrong. Yeah, basically you can signal to the network, do not store. And you can say for what reason. And the miners all have access to this information because it's a public ledger. And they'll say, oh, okay, this is the person that uploaded the data in the first place. They say GDPR request, and they just don't store it. So it's pretty simple, actually. It's far harder than something like Bitcoin, where the validation of old blocks would become impossible if everyone evicted a certain set of data from the system. So because we had to solve this problem of on-chain storage at scale, we just built this directly into the base protocol itself, and so we have a good solution for it.
Okay, great. Do you think it's possible to build nonprofit or public good projects in this space?
I've sort of argued that almost everything that is truly trustless is in some sense a public good. If it really is trustless, then regardless of whether you commercialize it in one form or another, you're giving rights to people, fundamentally immutable, guaranteed rights associated with that service. And I think that's a public good, even if it costs money to access. So like Arweave, for example, I would never call it a public good, but in that frame of reference, well, it gives you the right to speak in cyberspace, and it only charges you what it actually thinks that it's worth, and nobody extracts value when they do that, and certainly no one can come along and just casually change it of their own accord. Like even if Digital History Association wants to suggest a change, like fundamentally everyone has to adopt it. Um, and we have a set of principles that actually one of the lines in the principles document, which the first thing we did after we wrote it was give it to all of the core people in the ecosystem and say, hey, if we ever come to you, if I personally or anyone on the forward research team or anyone on the Digital History Association team come to you and say, we should change the protocol like this and it's out of line with these principles, you should go shout about it. And we should not do it. We actually made it such that was the point was to make it incorruptible beyond our own control. And yeah, one of the lines in there is to offer permanent information storage for the minimum viable cost. Like it's embedded not just in the technical layer, but in the social layer, that it won't try and extract value from you in order to do so. It's very hard, frankly, to find a token model that really accrues value in a coherent way and also does so without being extractive. I would say extractive things are generally not a public good. Like Uniswap has this fee switch they can turn on at any time and start extracting value from the protocol for the token holders. I wouldn't, yeah, that to me, that falls on the other side of the line. There are also other things you could do that are straight up non-profit, non-commercialized. But the model probably looks differently. You're not going to, it won't become a startup inherently because there is no value flowing around. So you can certainly start non-profit, public good initiatives. I would just kind of urge that maybe having a wider view of what public good really means, or actually screw that, a definition that sits with you personally. Like, better yet, what's the question behind the question? Why do you want to make a public good? Right? Is there something that is meaningful to you that is driving you towards you want something to exist in the world? Well, just go build that and do it as truly, if you will, as you can. And forget the names. Does it really matter how you classify it?
Okay, we'll do two more questions. From the perspective of a funder in the crypto space, is there an appetite for funding projects who are not interested in using a transferable token as part of the stack, i.e., an equity-focused project?
I see. Yes, certainly lots of people fund equity plays. I mean, typically, right, when we're on the sort of downside of that oscillating curve, this used to be the case, I don't know if this is the case in the last cycle, there's certainly much more appetite for equity plays than token plays because tokens are seen as kind of like scammy and associated with all the bad stuff from the previous cycle, whatever it turns out to be. Last time it was Terra Luna. This time it'll be, I think, that other stable coin thing, I guess. You know, yeah.
Hey Sam, I'm curious about your take on how decentralized tech can empower non-tech companies to compete with big centralized platforms. What steps do you think non-tech founders should consider to leverage these technologies effectively?
Well, I think the big deal is that if there were an Amazon on Leaf or similar, and it was set up in that kind of public good style, whatever we call that thing, so non-extractive style, we can say, then it gives you a platform with which you can reach end users and get distribution and run a business with confidence that your business is not going to be just basically usurped for whatever Amazon works out as the best way to make money today. So that's what the whole industry is about to some extent. I think we're relatively early in that being truly widely applicable to people. But that's the fundamental goal. As a non-tech founder today, there are a few ideas I have, I guess. Can you send me this person's username? I'll try and reach out to them afterwards.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. With any luck, they're on Discord. Sorry if you're not.
Yeah. Um, Great. I think we'll end on that note. Um, but thank you, Sam. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for all of the insights that you've shared, and thank you for participating in the keynote for AO Ventures and helping all the founders in this cohort. Um, we're
Of
very
course.
happy to be hosting keynotes number 6 and 7 next week. So be sure to register for those. And thank you everyone else for being here. And as always, we're really excited to see how your projects develop and seeing how we can support you guys building in the permanent web.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone. Good luck on the journey.
Thanks, guys.